The story is titled 30 Seconds of Chaos: How One Mistake Let a Lifer Walk Free. You don't hear the door lock the first time. You feel it. It's a vibration that travels through the steel frame, through the concrete floor, and up into the soles of your cheap canvas shoes. It settles in your teeth. That's the moment the world ends. Not when the judge says the words, not when the cuffs click, but when that heavy electronic thud clank seals you in a box smaller than a rich man's bathroom. I came into High Desert State Prison in Nevada on a Tuesday. The heat outside was blistering, dry enough to crack your lips just by breathing. But inside the transport bus, the air conditioning was set to meat locker cold. I was shivering, not from the temperature, but from the adrenaline crash. I'm Elias Thorne, 42, male. I was a mechanic before I was a number. I fixed transmissions and timing belts. I was good with my hands, good at solving problems that had a logical fix. But there's no wrench for a felony murder charge. I was the driver. That's it. I sat in the car while a kid I barely knew panicked inside a liquor store and pulled a trigger. He got life. I got life. The law calls it being a party to the crime. I called it the end of everything I ever was. Processing is designed to strip you. It's not just about safety. It's about erasing the person you were an hour ago. You strip naked in front of men who look at you like you're livestock. You lift your arms, open your mouth, squat and cough. You surrender your name and take a number. The smell of the intake room is something I'll never scrub out of my memory. Industrial bleach masking the scent of stale sweat and unwashed bodies. It smells like fear. That's where I first saw C.O. Miller, 35 male. He wasn't the biggest guard on the shift, but he walked with the heavy-footed arrogance of someone who knew that in here, he was God. He had eyes that looked dead, flat and bored, until he found something to hurt. A young kid, maybe 20, stumbled while trying to put his jumpsuit on, his shackles tangling. Miller didn't help him. He stepped in close, crowding the kid's space, and kicked the boy's feet out from under him. The kid hit the concrete hard, face first. "Gravity works the same in here, idiot," Miller said. He didn't shout. He just smiled, a thin, tight expression that didn't reach those dead eyes. That was the lesson. Cruelty wasn't a punishment here. It was the atmosphere. It was the air we breathed. They marched us to the block. B-Wing. It was a cavern of echoes. Men were screaming, laughing, banging on bars, a cacophony of noise that assaulted you from every angle. It sounded like a zoo where the animals had gone insane. I was shoved into a cell on the second tier. The space was tight, smelling of damp wool and toilet water. My cellmate was already on the top bunk, staring at the ceiling. Marcus, old man Vane, 58, male. He didn't look down when I walked in. He was a lifer, been inside since the late 90s for a double homicide that started as a bar fight. He was lean, his skin like old parchment stretched over wire, and he had a stillness to him that was more terrifying than the screaming men outside. "Top bunk's mine," Vane said, his voice scratching like sandpaper. "Don't snore, don't pace, and don't ask me what I did." I sat on the bottom bunk, the mattress barely an inch thick over the steel slab. I put my head in my hands. The reality was setting in, a physical weight on my chest. I wasn't going home. I wasn't going to see the sun without a fence in the way ever again. "I didn't kill anyone," I whispered, mostly to myself. A useless plea to a universe that had stopped listening. Vane chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. He leaned over the side of the bunk, looking at me upside down. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and completely devoid of pity. "Doesn't matter, new fish. Innocence is just a story you tell yourself to stay warm. But in here, that story will freeze you to death. You're not a mechanic anymore. You're not a driver. You're state property." He pulled back up, rustling a newspaper. "Forget the world, kid. It's already forgotten you." I laid back, staring at the graffiti scratched into the bottom of Vane's bunk. Names, dates, curses. I traced a jagged line with my thumb. I felt the vibration of the tier doors slamming shut for the night count. Thud clank. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I just listened to the breathing of 1,000 men in cages, realizing that to survive this, I would have to kill the part of me that still believed in fairness. That man died the moment the door locked. The man left on the bunk had to become something else, something harder, or he wouldn't last the week. Time doesn't pass in here, it erodes. You don't count days. You count the shakedowns, the lockdowns, and the times the chow hall runs out of milk. 2 years bled into the concrete of B-Wing, and the numbness Vane talked about became my second skin. I learned to walk without looking at anyone's chest or eyes. Gaze at the waist, always the waist. That's how you spot the shank before it enters your gut. I got a job assignment 6 months in, thanks to a clean record and my background with engines. They wouldn't let me near the motor pool, too many tools that could turn into weapons, so they put me in the industrial laundry. It was the bowels of the prison, a humid, deafening hell of steam presses and massive tumblers that shook the floor. But it had one advantage. It was located next to the loading dock. Every Tuesday and Friday the linen trucks arrived. That was my television. I'd push the canvas carts full of gray uniforms toward the bay doors and just breathe. The air coming through the open bay smelled like diesel and dust. The sweetest perfume I'd ever known because it came from out there. The routine was ironclad. Truck pulls into the sally port. Outer gate closes. Inspection. Inner gate opens. Truck backs in. Unload. Load. Inner gate closes. Outer gate opens. It was a mechanical rhythm, a binary code of open, shut, open, shut. But I'm a mechanic. I don't just see machines. I see their fatigue. I see where the metal is tired. It started with the heat. July in Nevada is a physical assault. The temperature on the loading dock was pushing 110. The hydraulic pistons on the massive steel gates were groaning, the fluid thinning out, the seals expanding. I watched the guards sweating through their uniforms, agitated, sloppy. C.O. Miller was the dock supervisor that day. He'd only gotten worse over the last year. The boredom was eating him alive, rotting him from the inside out. He'd started playing games, holding back mail, accidentally dropping trays, or making men stand in the sun for counts that lasted 40 minutes. He was a bomb waiting for a match. I was stacking carts near the bay when the mistake happened. It wasn't a Hollywood explosion. It was a glitch, a whisper in the system. A new driver was backing a delivery truck in, grinding the gears, struggling with the angle. Miller was screaming at him, red-faced, banging his baton on the truck's fender. "Cut the wheel, you moron! Cut it!" Miller roared. Because of the heat and the shouting, the tower guard, a guy named Perez, usually sharp but today sluggish with heat exhaustion, hit the gate cycle button too early. The inner gate started to close while the truck's bumper was still clearing the sensor. The gate hit the bumper and shuddered. Safety protocols kicked in. The gate retracted. But the system panicked. The heat-swollen hydraulics didn't reset. For exactly 12 seconds, the inner gate was fully open. And because the sensor was confused by the obstruction and the extreme glare of the sun on the sensor eye, the computer thought the sally port was empty. I watched the light on the control panel near the wall. It turned green. The outer gate, the one leading to the desert, to the highway, to life, unlocked. It didn't open, but the magnetic maglock disengaged with a heavy clunk that only a mechanic would hear over the noise of the laundry. Both gates were unlocked at the same time. The airlock was broken. It lasted maybe 20 seconds. Then the driver pulled forward, the sensor cleared, and the system slammed the outer lock back into place. Miller never noticed. Perez in the tower never noticed. They were too busy cursing the heat and the driver. But I saw it. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. It wasn't just a glitch. It was a repeatable failure. Obstruction plus heat plus manual override equals a system reboot. During that reboot, the brain of the prison goes dead. That night, the silence in the cell felt different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was pregnant with a secret. Vane was on his bunk, reading a paperback with the cover torn off. He hadn't spoken since Chow, where he'd traded his cornbread for a pack of headache powder. "You're breathing too loud, Thorne," Vane muttered, not looking up. "You sound like you just ran a mile." I sat up, gripping the edge of the mattress. I looked at the bars, then up at him. "The gates," I whispered. "The hydraulics on the loading dock. They have a blind spot." Vane lowered the book slowly. In the dim light of the tier, his face looked skeletal, but his eyes were awake. Dangerously awake. "Don't talk about holes in the net, kid. It breaks your heart." "It's not a hole," I said, my voice trembling with the terrifying clarity of it. It's a window, but it only opens when the system is confused, when there's chaos. Chaos gets you shot, Vane said, sitting up and swinging his legs over the side. Chaos gets you the hole. Not if we control it, I said. Miller. He's the variable. He's erratic. He disrupts the flow. If the system thinks there's an emergency, if the sensors are blocked. Vane stared at me for a long time. He was measuring me, weighing the desperation against the logic. He saw what I saw. He saw the math. Miller isn't just a variable, Vane said softly, a dark smile ghosting his lips. He's the key. But you can't just wait for a truck to get stuck again. You have to make the system fail. And to do that, you need to make this whole block bleed. He dropped from the top bunk, landing silently on the concrete. He moved close, his voice barely a breath. You found the door, mechanic. Now you have to build the bomb that opens it. That was the moment the plan ceased to be a fantasy. It became a weight we both carried. We weren't just inmates anymore. We were engineers of a disaster, and we needed C.O. Miller to light the fuse. The preparation was agony. It wasn't the physical labor, it was the silence. For 3 weeks, Vane and I moved around each other like ghosts, speaking in a shorthand that would have sounded like gibberish to anyone else. We needed a fuse, and we needed a hammer. The fuse was the lint. In the laundry sector, lint is everywhere. A gray, flammable snow that coats the pipes and gathers in the darkest corners of the dryer vents. I spent 2 weeks disabling the safety thermal sensors on dryer Nerf 4. It was the oldest machine, a rusted beast that shook the floor when it spun. I adjusted the gas intake valve just enough to make it run hot, dangerous hot, but not enough to trip the main breaker. The hammer was the heat. August hit the desert like a physical blow. The thermometer on the loading dock read 112 degrees by noon. The air shimmered off the asphalt, distorting the view of the fences. The hydraulic fluid in the gate arms was thin as water, and the pumps were screaming. On the morning of the 14th, Vane looked at me. He didn't say goodbye. He just handed me a shim I'd filed down from a spoon handle, a thin, jagged piece of metal designed to slide into the optical sensor of the gate. Don't look back, Vane said. His voice was flat, empty of hope. Looking back is for people with a future. At 14 hours, the linen truck rumbled into the Sallyport. The driver was new again, sweating, nervous. The heat was suffocating. C.O. Miller was pacing the dock, his uniform dark with sweat, his temper fraying. He was screaming at the inmates to speed up the loading. He kicked a canvas cart, sending it skidding into my shins. Move it, Thorne! You want to sleep standing up tonight? Miller barked, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. I kept my head down. Moving, boss. I pushed the cart toward the truck, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought he'd hear it. I positioned the cart near the sensor array, right where the inner gate met the concrete. Then the world exploded. It wasn't a bomb. It was dryer number 4. Vane had loaded it with grease-soaked rags and bypassed the timer. When the heat hit critical, the lint trap ignited. A whump of concussive force blew the door of the dryer open, followed instantly by a thick, black column of oily smoke. The fire alarm didn't trigger immediately. The sensors were clogged with soot, but the panic was instant. Men screamed. The smoke filled the laundry cavern in seconds, a blinding, choking fog. Fire! Fire in the hole! Someone yelled. On the dock, Miller spun around, his hand dropping to his baton. In the tower, Perez was distracted, his face pressed against the glass, looking down at the smoke billowing from the laundry vents, not at the gates. This was the variable. This was the chaos. I didn't run away from the danger. I moved into it. While Miller was shouting into his radio, distracted by the inferno behind him, I dropped to a knee by the gate track. I jammed the metal shim into the reflector of the safety eye. Then I stood up and kicked the heavy rubber bumper of the truck, hard. Back it up, I screamed at the driver, mimicking a guard's command. Back it up now. The panicked driver, seeing the smoke and hearing the order, threw the truck into reverse. He lurched backward 3 feet, blocking the gate path. The system screamed. The hydraulics tried to close the inner gate, hit the truck, and seized. The heat, the obstruction, the jammed sensor, the computer brain of High Desert State Prison suffered a stroke. Clunk. The magnetic lock on the outer gate disengaged. The light on the panel flickered from red to green. I looked at the open gap. It was narrow, just enough for a man. But Miller turned back. He saw the green light. He saw me standing there. The confusion left his eyes, replaced by a dawn of horrifying realization. He didn't go for his radio. He went for his mace. "Thorne!" he roared, lunging at me. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I was a mechanic, and he was a broken part. I swung the heavy steel locking pin of the laundry cart. It caught him in the shoulder with a sickening crunch. Miller went down, gasping, grabbing at his arm. I looked for Vane. He was standing in the doorway of the laundry room, framed by the black smoke. He wasn't running. He was holding the door shut against the other guards, a crowbar jammed into the handle. He met my eyes across the dock, a distance of 30 feet that felt like an ocean. He smiled, a grim, toothless, final smile. He nodded once toward the desert. Go. He wasn't coming. He was the cost. I turned and ran. I squeezed through the gap between the truck and the frame, my jumpsuit snagging on the metal. I hit the hot asphalt of the Sally Port. The outer gate was unlocked, but heavy. I threw my weight against it. It groaned, the seal breaking. I slipped through. The heat outside was different. It wasn't stagnant. It was wild. I didn't look at the tower. I didn't look at the road. I ran into the scrub brush, into the blinding white light of the Nevada afternoon, my lungs burning, the sound of sirens finally piercing the air behind me. I ran until my legs were numb, leaving the only man who had saved me to burn for my freedom. The desert doesn't care about your freedom. It doesn't care about your guilt. It only cares about water, and I didn't have any. The first hour was pure animal panic. I ran until the prison sirens were just a low hum in the distance, swallowed by the vast, oppressive silence of the Nevada scrubland. The heat that had been my accomplice inside the walls turned on me the moment I hit the open ground. It hammered down on my gray jumpsuit, turning the fabric into a kiln. Every breath felt like inhaling broken glass. I scrambled through ravines and dry creek beds, tearing my hands on sagebrush, expecting every shadow to be a SWAT team, every circling hawk to be a police chopper. I found a concrete drainage pipe under a desolate stretch of access road as the sun began to dip. I crawled inside, curling into a ball in the darkness. That was my first night of freedom, shivering in the dirt, smelling of stale sweat and dried blood, listening to the terrifying sound of cars passing overhead. Each set of tires sounded like a judgment. Thud, 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 thud. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. When you've lived in a cage for years, the horizon is too big. It made me dizzy. I kept waiting for the count. I kept waiting for the lights to flicker. But there was only the dark and the coyotes yipping in the distance, sounding like inmates laughing in the yard. By the second day, the thirst was a physical weight, heavier than the guilt. I raided a dumpster behind a shuttered gas station 10 miles north of the prison perimeter. I found a half-empty bottle of warm Gatorade and a greasy, sun-baked flannel shirt someone had tossed. I stripped off the prison gray. My skin underneath was pale, marked by scars and bad tattoos, and pulled on the flannel. It smelled of gasoline and someone else's sweat, but it was the best thing I had ever worn. I buried the jumpsuit deep in the sand, marking the grave with a heavy stone. That was where Elias Thorne died, or at least where he went underground. The paranoia is worse than the confinement. In prison, you know who the enemy is. They wear badges. They carry batons. Out here, the enemy is everyone. A cashier who looks at you too long. A cop eating a donut 3 booths down. A kid on a bike who might have seen your face on the news. I made it to a town whose name I won't write down. I work cash jobs now, fixing generators, repairing farm equipment. I keep my head down. I don't make friends. I don't look women in the eye. I live in a trailer that smells like mildew, and I pay my rent in crumpled bills. But I'm not free. Not really. Every night I dream of the laundry. I smell the smoke. I feel the vibration of the dryer exploding. And I see Vane. I see him standing in that doorway, the crowbar in his hand, holding back the inevitable. I wonder what they did to him. Did Miller get back up? Did they beat Vane to death right there on the concrete floor? Or did they drag him to the hole and let him rot? I check the obituaries sometimes, searching for a name I'm terrified to find. I never see it. The system swallows men like Vane whole and doesn't burp up the bones. He told me looking back breaks your heart. He was right. It did more than that. It hollowed me out. I realized the trade we made wasn't equal. He gave his life so I could have this. This looking over my shoulder. This flinching at loud noises. This solitary confinement without walls. Sometimes when I'm working under the hood of an old pickup truck, the smell of grease and hot metal hits me, and for a split second, I'm back in the Sally port. The adrenaline spikes. My heart stops. I wait for the clunk of the magnetic lock. I wait for Miller to scream. Then I slide out from under the chassis, wipe my hands on a rag, and look at the sky. It's blue. It's open. It's beautiful. But I can't enjoy it. Freedom isn't the absence of bars. It's the absence of fear. And by that definition, I'm still serving life. I walked out of High Desert State Prison, but I never really left. I just traded a 6x8 cell for a world that feels like it's waiting to catch me. 30 seconds of chaos. That's all it was. A glitch in the machine. A moment where the universe blinked. I slipped through the crack, but a part of me, the part that could sleep at night, the part that felt human, got caught in the gears and crushed. I'm alive. I'm out. But every time I hear a siren wail in the distance, just for a second, I wish the gate had stayed closed. At least inside, I knew when the punishment would end. Out here, I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop. And it will. It always does.